Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to Australian culture shock, 10 weird things about life in Australia. And yeah, I've never done a reaction around Australia, I don't think. If there's random facts that I could say, the main sport there is Australian rules football, is that what it's called? Is it just called Australian football? I don't know what the actual name for it is, but yeah, I know that. I'm not even giving a fact because I don't know the name of it, but yeah, I'm interested in learning about these things because I do these reactions to other countries, mainly to the US, but I've done reactions to other ones too. And Australia is a country that I really do like. I mean, I've got family that live there. I've never been to Australia. I didn't actually start traveling until a few months ago. Only just got a passport. And Australia is so far, I feel like I'll be too scared to fly because it's such a long distance, but at the same time it's a beautiful country. And there's a little part of Australia that I do really love. It's the small city in the middle, something Springs. Is it Alice Springs? I've seen videos about it and I just think it looks so like, just it's so far from everything. It's not, I don't know if it's paradise, but it's like built in the middle of a desert, and it's just, again, so far from any other big civilization. I just feel like, I don't know, I've looked into that place before, but never Australia as a whole.
What's going on, guys?
Fucking hell. And yeah, I'm just interested in doing a reaction pretty much. If you would want more of these reactions, if there's fellow Australians that, I say fellow Australians, I'm not Australian. If there's Australians that watch this and would like me to do more reactions, suggest in the comments what you'd want me to see. And I'm down to do that because, again, I'm down to learn and I like learning about places around the world. But we're going to jump into this video, we're going to check this out, and yeah, let's see what this guy has got to say about the country of Australia.
What's going on, guys? I'm Pete from Aussie English. Welcome to this episode today where I'm going to be talking about culture shock in Australia. Let's get into it. All right, so I was recently chatting to my wife, trying to come up with a list of things that she had culture shock with when she came to Australia. So if you don't know, my wife is originally from Brazil. Hey, Hakel, if you're watching.
Brother, you're doing good, man. You got a Brazilian girl? Come on.
And so she came to Australia, and obviously Brazil is a different country, different culture. When she got to Australia, there were a bunch of different things that she found strange. Cultural aspects of Australian life that she found different, weird, strange. So I made a list, and now let's go through 10 of those things, okay? And let me know in the comments below if you found them weird as well. All right. Number 1, cars are incredibly cheap secondhand in Australia. So cars in Australia are actually really expensive when...
See, so when you first buy them, they're expensive. Why? I'm thinking like Australia, probably the main mode of transport is obviously driving because all the cities are on the coast, right? And you're going to have to drive from one end to the other because, I mean, I guess you can drive through Australia, but it's just such a big land area with cities spread around. I guess maybe flying is the main actually thing.
They're new, at least as far as I know, comparatively speaking, especially if you get into luxury cars like European luxury cars like Mercedes, BMW and Audi. In Australia, we used to have the Ford and Holden manufacturers here building the cars in Australia. They no longer do that. When they did that though, the government put tax on any cars that were luxury cars more than $60,000. And so you'll find that a lot of these cars from overseas that are luxury cars, especially those from Europe, will be very expensive compared to other places in the world. She also found that second-hand cars were incredibly cheap. In Brazil, cars, whether new or second-hand, are apparently much more expensive, relatively speaking, than they are here. For instance, when I bought my second-hand Ford Falcon that I got recently, I recently gave it away though, but when I bought that second-hand, it was about 12 years old and it cost me $3,000. When I bought my first Holden wagon, again, it was about 18 years old and it cost me $2,500. So it wasn't very much at all. So there you go. In Australia, cars, if they're second-hand, can be incredibly cheap. Number 2, cuts of meat. This is one that totally caught me by surprise. I had never thought about this.
Such a niche topic, cuts of meat.
But the cuts of meat in Australia are very different from how they are in Brazil. One example was when I was looking up how to do Brazilian barbecues in Australia. I wanted to buy some meat and I wanted to try and do them authentically Brazil style, churrasco. I tried to get the cut of meat for picanha. Picanha is a style of Brazilian barbecue where they buy the rump part of the beef, like from the bull, right? And they put salt on it, there's fat on the beef, and they do it on a barbecue. I tried to go and get this, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find the picanha cut of meat at any different butchers that I went to. So I had to specifically ask them to get the entire part of the cow that they normally chop up into different cuts and remove that part for me to then use, because actually for them, they would chop it up and use it as porterhouse steaks, which were cut through that slice of meat, usually like this, as opposed to taking out the whole section, the rump section, and using that instead. So I had no idea that the cuts of meat in Australia are very different from those in Brazil. And if you want to get the certain cuts of meat that you want to use from other cultures, other countries, you might have to go and specifically ask a butcher to cut them for you.
The more you know.
Number 3, toilet paper. Toilet paper. So I was aware that toilet paper isn't a universal thing when I went to Southeast Asia for the...
Oh yeah, that's true actually. And I know in certain cultures, I think, is it Islam? They don't clean their ass with their strong hand. I know about that. So I guess he's comparing this to like countries like, he's not specifically comparing this to the whole world. He's comparing this to certain different countries. I see now.
For the first time. I went to Indonesia, where some of the motels and hotels would have toilet paper because I guess they were used to foreigners from the West coming to Indonesia. But a lot of the time they had a hole in the ground and a bucket of water that you would use to wash yourself. Makes sense, but
better for the environment.
In Australia we use toilet paper. One thing that was shocking to Kel was the fact that in Australia you can flush toilet paper down the toilet, because in Brazil the sewer system isn't set up to be able to handle flushing of toilet paper, so instead of flushing it you have to put it in a bin next to the toilet and empty that every day. So there you go. Toilet paper was one of those strange things in Australia.
We got it so easy in like places like England, haven't we, man? We take it all for granted. We really do. Things like that, like, I know it's not a big deal. They have, like, certain people have from other countries have such bigger sort of issues to deal with, but simple things like that for us, like, we really take it for granted.
Australia, that you can flush down the toilet. Number 4, coffee culture in Australia. Any of you guys who have come to Australia and spent a significant amount of time in some of the big cities in particular, like Sydney and Melbourne, will know that we are mental. We are crazy about our coffee. We
like
take
Americans,
that stuff seriously. There are probably hundreds of cafes in the CBDs of Sydney and Melbourne alone. The
Same
quality
here, to be
of the
fair.
beans that are used, the variety of different coffees that you can get, and the artisanry that is used, the skill with which people are trained up to make the coffee is pretty much as good as it ever gets anywhere in the world. At least I'm told, right? I used to work in a cafe, and that was one of the things they prided themselves most on, the quality of their coffee. So it may be a shock when you come to Australia that the coffee is very, very good. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places. Probably not very good if you go to Starbucks, because that's American style, and Americans, they have their own way of doing coffee. Number
It's like Dick though, he's coming for them. God
5, barbecues at camping grounds and at the beach.
See, with like barbecues, like camping and stuff, when you're camping in a place like Australia, do you have like these crazy animals coming around you? Because when I think of Australia, I think of, as anyone who's never been before, these big ass spiders or just kangaroos or whatever it is, but mainly the insects, the big insects that can cause damage, to say the least. Will you see this sort of stuff around? I'm assuming you will, but it depends where you camp. But like, yeah, when you're camping in Australia, do you deal with these things? Because in England, bro, there's nothing, man. We are so lucky. I mean, the worst thing you'll have if you're camping, you'll maybe hear some crickets, depending on where you're camping. You'll hear some crickets just screaming out their heads. But other than that, there's no real things that we deal with. But because obviously in the US, you'll have things like bears and stuff. Like you'll have these big ass animals, not at all places, but you can have the opportunity of having that happening to you. In Australia, is it like that? We have a kangaroo just jumping on your tent or something like that?
So again, I grew up in Australia. I used to go camping all the time, several times a year with my parents. We would go to places in the bush, you know, forests, national parks, places like Wilson's Promontory
Look at that
in
place.
Victoria. Every time you go to those places, there tend to be places where you can barbecue food, you can cook food. Quite often they have gas, you might have to put some money in there to be able to use the gas. Maybe you have to bring your own fuel for the barbecue, you know, there might be some places, campsites where you have to make the fire yourself, but pretty much every campsite you go to will have some kind of barbecue for you to cook food. And it's the same for a lot of beaches that have tourist spots where people come in large numbers and they want to have food. So there's barbecues everywhere. This was something that Kel found really strange. And it wasn't the cultural norm in Brazil for you to go to camping grounds or to beaches and find places to just barbecue your own food. If you wanted to do that, you'd have to bring your own. BYO Barbie. In Australia, you don't have to.
It's because the weather's there, man. I mean, obviously Brazil's quite hot as well. It's really hot actually, and very tropical. But Australia's just like, I swear it's just hot all year round, and it's just sun upon sun. In England, you probably do have places where you do have barbecues, like permanent built-in barbecues, but a lot of the time you will just have to buy your own, to be fair, again, because the weather here is terrible.
Number 6, and this is one that Brazilians always tell me whenever I meet them. Our second-hand culture in Australia
Same in England.
is different from Brazil, probably
People
elsewhere in the world as well.
things.
So what happens if I have a couch in my house that I don't want anymore? I don't just throw it out. I don't just give it away to friends, although, you know, you could do that if you wanted. Quite often what will be done is it'll be taken outside, put on the nature strip with some cardboard that says free. And so
Yeah, that happens here, to be fair. If there's someone like getting rid of just anything you can think of, some sort of furniture, it'll be put out there. Someone can take it if they want. I've actually taken something before. I thought it was going to be useful. I never actually used it, so it's just in my apartment right now. But same sort of thing here, to be fair.
So people know that if they see junk or chairs, TVs, furniture, all that sort of stuff, if they see that in the nature strip out the front of someone's house, they know that it's free. Someone can take that. That it's free to a good home, that anyone can come and pick that up and take it home. And we do that all the time. A lot of the stuff that we have in our house is either bought secondhand online through places like Gumtree or Facebook, or we've seen it on the side of the road and thought, we don't want to waste that, we want to use it, so let's just bring it home and use it. So that's something you'll notice in Australia quite a lot. When you drive around the streets, there'll be furniture on nature strips, there'll be secondhand stuff, and it's free to be picked up. Number 7.
What is a nature strip? Is it like just a plot of grass that isn't a part of your property, just a bit in front? Is that what a nature strip is? I've never heard of that term.
Drinking water from the tap. This was another one that shocked me quite a lot because it's something I take for granted, that the water in our water system that gets brought to our houses is drinkable. You can drink the water out of the shower, when you're having a bath, you can drink any of the water that comes out of the pipes in your house, generally, right? Should be all good. That is not the case elsewhere in the world. Quite often when I was traveling in Southeast Asia, that would definitely not be something that foreigners like me should do, because we would quite often end up with sickness, end up on the toilet, riding the porcelain throne for quite a few days with a digestive illness. In Australia, it tends to be fine. We put chlorine in the water to kill everything. There's fluoride in there too for your teeth. So that was something that really shocked me. Elsewhere in the world, you may not be able to drink out of the taps. I know that in Brazil, they quite often have purifiers for their water right next to their sinks in their kitchens.
I do use purifiers as well, though, to be fair. Even though the water here is not going to be perfect, but it's better than a lot of places in the world, I do still use a distiller or like a purifier or whatever, because I want it to be pure, you know. But yeah, it's again another thing that's taken for granted completely, because if I wasn't picky or whatever, I can happily just drink out the tap, and I still do when I don't have any sort of purifier left or whatever it's called. I have to buy a new one, and it's sort of, I've been using it for a few months and it's like not as effective. We've got the chance to just drink and not worry about this sort of thing. It's again taken for granted these sorts of things.
In Australia, you won't see those things. There may be purifiers on the taps themselves.
Is that a thing?
Or people may have some kind of equipment in the fridge, you know, a jug that purifies the water. But generally, anywhere in Australia that has flowing water that comes out of taps, it's fine to drink, unless it says otherwise. Number 8, and I'm totally guilty of this, leaving things unlocked. So we live in Ocean Grove, which is a seaside town down the coast. about an hour and a half away from Melbourne. And quite often, I leave the doors unlocked in the house. I leave my car unlocked. It tends to be a very safe place. There's very little robbery, there's very little criminality taking place in Ocean Grove. Most places in Australia tend to be pretty safe, and you won't see things like massive locks on doors, grills protecting windows and doors, and people leaving their cars and their houses unlocked. Don't get me wrong, I definitely lock it from time to time when I'm going away or I'm going out for a long period of time and no one's at home. But this was something that my wife Kel from Brazil found very strange, that you would just leave doors open.
I mean, I can understand that, but even then, it takes 2 seconds to just lock your car to just avoid the risk of something happening. You must live in some bougie places. I'm assuming not everywhere in Australia will be like that. I know that in every country there's going to be places where it's not like that at all. That is one of the craziest things I've heard. I mean, I wouldn't say... when I used to live with my mum, we had one key, and whenever she would be out, or I was not out or whatever, and I had to come home, I know it would have made more sense to just leave it. Actually, no, we had a point we didn't have a key. I used to sleep with the door not locked. Oh God, we were quite poor, so we didn't do. I guess we just didn't pay for things or whatever. We didn't pay for things that we didn't think we needed. But yeah, to think about it, I did sleep in the house for about a year and a bit, maybe a bit longer, and it just was never locked. I can relate to you now, man. I'm not gonna lie, but still, car doors. If you have the opportunity to lock things, I'm still thinking, why wouldn't you do it? But hey, he's obviously, he knows everyone in his neighborhood and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I can't talk for him, can I?
Or, you know, you would go to bed and have the gauze doors shut at night, which could just be opened to let air in. She would find that very strange that they would not be locked, and also that you wouldn't lock your car. Number 9, walking the streets at night. So when I met my wife, I was living in Melbourne, in North Melbourne, and quite often I would be busy during the day studying, and then I would go to the gym, I would go and do jiu-jitsu, I would come home, and at maybe 10 or 11 o'clock at night, I would go for a run, or I'd go for a walk, listen to a podcast, and just walk around the streets. I would walk through some of the parks, like Royal Park or Princes Park, and I'd be like, you know, it's not a problem. That was a massive no-no for Kel. That was something that she would never, ever.
To be fair though, females, it's a lot riskier, sadly, in any country, even in England, wherever you are in the world, it's going to be risky. I mean, maybe she's doing it now, but that's one of those problems that's been around for whatever, I don't know, just women walking at night, it's just a lot riskier because there's some sick people out there. But yeah, in general, I used to go to the gym at there was points when my sleeping pattern was finished, and I would go to the gym literally like 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And this would be when I was 17, not even like an adult at this point. So yeah, I can definitely I can relate to this in a sense as well, but not everyone, and there's also still risks to it, to be fair. Well, I wouldn't suggest doing that in any country, but
ever do, because in Brazil, it's relatively unsafe to walk around by yourself at night, especially in places like parks where there's no light. So that was something that kind of shocked me as well. I was like, well, you know, it's Australia. It's pretty safe here. You can sort of walk around anywhere and it's, you know, you're fine. Obviously, we have our own fair share of crime, and sometimes bad things do happen to people, but usually you can walk around at night, especially in somewhere like a CBD, you know, a city like Melbourne or Sydney, and you're perfectly safe. So that was something that she found very strange. That was a big culture shock for her when she found out that I would sometimes go for a walk around midnight throughout Melbourne, throughout the parks, with music in my ears or listening to a podcast, you know, for an hour or so, and it was no big deal. But yeah, there you go. Number 10, guys, the very last one for this episode in Australia is that there is very little rubbish or littering in Australia compared to a lot of other countries. Culturally, this is a big...
When I do think of Australia, I do think of it just being a very clean, advanced country in general. Like, even in terms of compared to the UK, I just see Australia as just one of this, I wouldn't say paradise, but I do look at Australia as in a way like, wow, that's just a place that is perfect, or almost perfect, you know. The weather's good, they've obviously, again, like buildings, all this sort of stuff is clean there. Just all these possibilities. Plus, I think the humour there, I love the Australian sort of, is it humour or just the way they talk to each other? They'll just refer to each other as hello, cunt. Sorry, that's my worst accent. I just like the whole culture around it, to be fair. I do want to visit Australia. It's just so far. And I hate flying. So going to Australia is like a full day just flying. And you obviously have a stop. But it's one of those countries that I would love to come to, man.
Big no-no. So I cringe every time I see someone smoking who throws their cigarette butt on the ground, because usually there's a bin within walking distance that they could just put the cigarette out and throw it in the
cigarettes.
bin. The same with throwing newspapers or any kind of rubbish, bottles, whatever it is, on the ground. That tends to be a very big social no-no. You don't do that. You put it in the trash. We have bins all over the country, in parks, on streets, where you can throw your rubbish out. So in Australia, littering, it occurs, people definitely litter, but it is a social no-no. You will quite often be yelled at, or people will say something if you do that in front of people.
This happened, was it to me? I was with my brother for good, 10 years ago. I would have been like 10 years of age, and they were like 15, 16. And one of them littered, and someone literally across the street was just like, pick it up. And it made them pick it up. And in the moment, you're like, what are you doing? Just relax, mate. I mean, I'm a little kid. I'm not thinking like that. But I'm just thinking, just move along, man. But now I look at it now, and I'm like, yeah, fair enough to you, man. I see someone doing the same thing now, and I would think the same thing. Like, there's no reason to litter. If you've got the opportunity to put it in a bin, do it, man. So I do agree with what he's saying. I feel like there's a lot of similarities with Australia and the UK, and probably the US and like New Zealand and all these countries where they have the same sort of opinions and views on these things. But yeah, man.
People, okay? So that's it for this episode, guys.
I do want to check out more, because I feel like this was more focused on comparisons to like Asia or Brazil or different parts of the world, and not, I don't know, just not compared to the UK. Maybe there's not a video like that, but if you want more reactions to this kind of stuff, I would be down. And I would also love to learn and do videos about like this, not the slang, but just Australian English, I guess, because I feel like it's a mixture between US English and then English or whatever, or British English. So I would be interested in doing a video or like a reaction to that. But yeah, let me know some more videos related to Australia you'd want me to do. If you want more, I'm 100% down. I think it could be fun to start doing these types of reactions to other countries. And if you're from Australia, just give me some ideas of what you want to see. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Until next time, peace.